And credit is what we're going to start off with. So, of course, you can always go to freecreditreport.com in order to get a copy of your credit. Very important to check that out. I did have a client in the other day he was ready. Unfortunately, he had zero credit. And although that's much preferred to bad credit, you're going to need some credit. Now, of course, credit is made up of multiple of factors, your profile, but it outlines your willingness to pay, which creditors are always very interested in whether or not you're willing to pay things on time. So um, your credit score is obviously going to show your credit report. It's going to show your score, and the way it is derived is by a Fair Isaac algorithm. So Fair Isaac is a fellow that put this whole algorithm mathematical formula together that allows that that score then to really broadly represent the willingness to pay, ability to pay of a sort, and illustrates it to the creditor um, in whatever form it is that they choose. So depending on what you're going for in reference to credit, if you're going to go buy a house, then your credit score can range from 300 to 850. If you're going to go try and get a credit card, then your score is going to range differently. I think it's 4 to 900. And refrigerators, automobiles, they all have their own algorithm, all represented for that industry when they pull your credit. Interestingly enough, if it is a like industry pulling your credit, so you're going to go and buy a house. And so you go to this broker and he pulls your credit and you don't like him. Great, make a run for it. So then you go to this bank and they pull your credit. Well, as long as it's a like industry pulling your credit within the same 30-day period, it should only hit your score or adjust your score because you're going out trying to gain more credit, meaning generally speaking, you're going to have more debt to service with the same income, so your score would drop. But if it's the same industry, then it should only hit it once instead of hitting it 4 or 5 times, depending on who you're shopping around for your loan for. So good, bad, excellent. Most loan programs for mortgages, if you have a 740 FICO or better, you get the same rate as if you have a 850 FICO. And certainly there's many borrowers out there with over 800 FICOs, but if you have a 740 or better, it's all good. Again, generally speaking, 640 to 739 is going to get you an average rate, pretty much the stuff that's being quoted on TV, although there's a lot of hidden factors in reference to the quotes that they're doing on TV. But under 640, certainly under 600, and definitely under 580, the programs become sparse, higher interest rate, larger adjustments, and very limited. So if you're wanting to buy a 3-unit investment property in 29 Palms and you have a 580 FICO score, you're probably going to have to put at least 20% down. As opposed to if you had a 740 FICO score, same property, you're probably only going to have to put max 10%, might get away with 5. So it depends on the other factors that we're going to talk about today. Okay, so there we go. What important factors go into making up your credit score? Well, certainly the payment history. So if you're making your payments on time, that's 35% of your total score. The amount you owe is 30%. So now we're at 65% of your total score is made up of just those two items. So when I talk about amount you owe, that's going to be the 40% rule. So if you owe 40% or over 40% rather, that's going to be more harmful to your score than if you owe, say, 40% or less. So 39% is going to be impact your credit score in a positive way, as opposed to if you owe over 40%, it's going to impact your score negatively. So used to be 50%, it's dropped down to 40, just tightening up on the guidelines. Also, the available amount of credit in reference to, so how many lines you have. So let's say you have one credit card from Target, you owe 39% of its total balance, so it's worth $1,000 you could charge on it, you owe 390. That's 39%. So that's fantastic, but that's the only line you have, and you've only had it for 2 months. Well, everything's perfect. I mean, you fit right in everything, but the duration of time factors into it. So a lot of people would think, I have this credit line that I have had for 12 years. I had it when I was in high school, and I never use it. I'm getting rid of it. But that credit line, even though you're not using it because you've had it for so long, is really positively impacting your credit score. So you really want to consider when you open an account and when you close an account, and definitely always pay on time. So in reference to credit, there are what we call derogatory items, of course. And here's a nice little chart we put together. So you have the different loan options on the side, and then of course the different derogatory categories on the top. And this is the seasoning or time from the completion of that incident to today's date. So for instance, the very first sell. So an FHA foreclosure, if you're going to do an FHA loan and you had a foreclosure on a property, foreclosure is that the bank took it back from you, the home, you need 1 to 3 years from the case number assignment date. So what's that mean? Well, it means that if you were on time with your payments and it was more of a voluntary foreclosure, then you could possibly get away with 1 year as long as it goes through automated. But generally speaking, you're going to have a 3-year seasoning or need to wait 3 years from the date of title recording that it was taken from you to the date that the case number is pulled for an FHA loan. So this is just an interesting grid that is just part of the underwriting guidelines for various programs that just shows you, hey, nothing lasts forever, and pretty much everything is forgiven within 7 years. So 7 years might sound like a long time, but you can get away with less depending on what we're doing. All right. Another very important aspect is erroneous information. So the CFPB, Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, that's one of the many governing bodies for mortgage and real estate, came out with this really nice checklist. You know, it's a credit report review checklist. And it's nice that you can have this checklist, get a copy of your free credit report, and look for erroneous information. You know, it's really likely that a person's credit report has poor information on it, whether it's an address that you've never heard of, or an alias that you've never heard of, you know, a different spelling of your name or a different name that you may or may not have gone under. But you want to make sure that your credit report has accurate information, no erroneous items. So it's always good to go to freecreditreport.com, get a copy of your credit, check it against this report, and then uh, act accordingly. You know, the credit report will have items at the bottom that illustrate how to get in touch with one of the three or all three of the bureaus. You know, of course, there's Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian, the three different mortgage reporting bureaus that often have all the same information, but may have different information. So if one has a street address that you were never on, but the other doesn't, you're only going to want to obviously contact the one that has it incorrectly or erroneously. Okay, so enough on credit. Very important, but it's no less or more important than the other two items. So we always want to make sure that in reference to debt, that we're very conscious of going back to the credit, making sure that we're paying everything on time, and we only take on that debt that we absolutely need or want. Okay. So in reference to a mortgage, the debt that we look at is real estate financing, automobiles, revolving would be the credit card, and consumer financed items, refrigerators, washing machines, tires, something that you may have promised to pay and that they're receiving payments. Now, not every debt is reported to a credit bureau. Client and myself were talking about a week or two ago. They had a motorcycle loan that the payment didn't get reported because it was from his credit union. And I, that's possible, but don't count on that. Generally speaking, all debts that you're making payments on are going to be reported to the credit bureau. But what's not going to be reported are items like utility bills, gas bill, those kinds of things. A gas card would be reported, but obviously not going and purchasing gas. So there's certain things that aren't. We, in reference to mortgages, are only concerned with what's on your credit report, and that in reference to your total gross income. So also, those items that are on your credit report, but only have 10 months worth of payments left. So you owe $200 total on the item, but your payments are $50 a month. Well, that's only 4 more payments. That's less than 10. So we do not have to calculate that into your debt to income ratio. So debt to income ratio is all your bills that are on your credit report, of course, as well as things like alimony, child support, separate maintenance, those things. But what are not obviously included are groceries, utility, gas, taxes, those kinds of things. So we take those bills and divide it by your gross monthly income. That's how we come up with the debt to income ratio that we covered in very well in session 1, I believe it was. You can always refer back to that. There's links to that on our website, aboutredlandsrealty.com. But debt to income is very important. Different programs have different debt to income ratios. In general, you want to make sure and be below 43%. So if you make $100 a month gross, you really don't want on your credit report to have bills over $43 a month. Okay. $1,000 a month, $430 a month in debt. So it's a 43. There's certainly loans that go up higher for sure. I had mentioned before in a previous session that on a VA loan, they don't care about debt to income ratio. They care about residual income. Different calculation, but I've certainly done VA loans with 60% debt to income ratio. But they had enough income for the residual to work out. And the residual income for a VA loan is per family size, but we'll get more into program details next week, which will be very exciting. I'm sure that none of you will miss that. Okay, so we've covered credit and debt. Well, what about your job, income? So, of course, a lot of what we're talking about is general guidelines for underwriting. And it's no different for your job. So in reference to your job, of course, you could be, and this is just a list of a few, full-time, part-time, you could be a seasonal worker, you could be self-employed, and you could work for a family-owned business, whether it's a corporation or not. And that is one that kind of strikes people occasionally. What I mean by strikes people is they weren't quite ready for the requirements of it being a family-owned business. So if you work for a family-owned business, that is kind of considered as being self-employed. If you're self-employed, then we would have to go off in order to go full documentation for the best interest rates and the highest loan to value, the best loans. You would be considered self-employed. So we're going to go off of your tax returns, your 1040s, for the last 2 years averaged. Now, that's the same as I mentioned for self-employed. If, however, you're a seasonal worker, it's similar in that there's lots of migrant farm workers, for instance, that would work for 8-10 months and then they're off 2-4 months. So their income is average for 2 years as well. Full-time is the easiest, 2 paychecks, 30 days worth of paychecks. And of course, we need a 2-year work history in all cases, but full-time, 2 weeks, or one month, 2 paychecks usually, but it's 30 days worth of pay stubs in order to give them the full income. Part-time is an interesting one. So often we have borrowers that say work 36 or 38 hours a week. That's not 40. It's not considered full-time, unfortunately. Now, if you have a contract with your employer that says this is considered full-time, well, then we can take it. But if there isn't a contract that says that 36 hours is full-time, then it's not. And in that case, being part-time, we would have to average for 2 years. The issue part of the time with averaging for 2 years is that if you made more money, say in 2018 than you made in 2019, right? Because those are the 2 years that we would have to average currently. You made more in 2018 than 2019, then that's declining income, meaning we're going to have to go with just 2019. We're not averaging it. So it's worst case scenario. However, if it increased, if your income increased from 2018 to 2019, then it is averaged. Just to go back for a moment to full time, if we have a pay stub, 30 days worth of pay stubs at $1,000 a week, but you're going to get a raise, then we can qualify you at the 1,000. Once you get that raise and you can show that pay stub, bam, now, as long as it continues to be full time and it's likely to continue, the raise counts, and that's the income we would give you. So the different types of jobs and different classifications really does determine, the guideline that we're going to have to go by in order to calculate income. So questions, comments, this is a topic that you can run through pretty quick, but there's so much information, and every scenario is just a little bit different. There's lots of little things that you can add back in, depreciation, depletion, um, home use of office, office use at home, um, 26 cents per mile for mileage that's written off. Generally, you're going to write off 56 or so cents per mile. These kinds of things. There's a lot that goes into it that we don't obviously need to get into today, but the point is that it's a dynamic field. Each of these aspects is a real dynamic field that you have to be on top of each one of them. And this little bit of knowledge that I provided today allows you to have a little bit of insight that will help you in the future to arrange your situation so that you can qualify for the max that you possibly can to buy your home. Not that you have to use all of that money, but it's nice to have options.